Hey guys, I hope you are having a awesome day off from school. I don't know how much snow you got in Trigg County, but here in Murray we got about 1 to 2 inches. So day off from school is always a good one. You should have taken the quiz already. Initially the plan was for you guys to take that in Blackboard, but we are still having issues on the end of HCC with Blackboard, so we'll just have to innovate and then move on past that. I have been in contact with them, and they say it should be resolved by the end of this week. So, one thing I always try to do is we launch into it says week 3, but actually, you know what? I'm gonna fix that real quick because I'm a stickler. There we go. Um, Little things like that bug me. We are now week 2 industrial America. Okay. I kind of cut out a unit from last semester, but this is at the beginning of every unit. I'm going to have the page numbers and or the chapters that you need to focus on. And some of you have asked about the textbook and like what do we need to do, as far as like do we have to read all of it? No, but you need to familiarize yourself with certain concepts in it. So I would definitely recommend at least looking through it, because your weekly discussion posts, you once the majority of you or all of you have your textbook, I will expect you to reference your textbook at least once or twice with the citation. Okay, so it's always important to know what the scope of that week is as far as what we're looking at. Okay, so week 2, industrial America. Okay, so we're going to look at the time period when the United States begins to rapidly industrialize. And unfortunately, war is always a moneymaker. And this is not just exclusive to the Civil War. You look at World War One. The United States emerges as a global superpower after World War One, in part because we sold to both sides in the conflict. World War Two, okay, is what propels the United States out of the terrible Great Depression of the 1930s. Some people try to say it's FDR's New Deal. It was World War Two. FDR's New Deal was just like a band aid on the situation, but it was not a remedy. It was not the solution. All right. In this case, okay, the Civil War, okay, during the war, okay, you're talking thousands and thousands of troops engaged in combat. The northern factories really had to mobilize in order to meet the need of the war. Okay, so when the Civil War is going on, all of these factories are producing at high levels to produce all the supplies necessary for the war. And this was a nice launching pad into the next half of the century because the rest of the world is industrializing as well. And it's kind of like a roundabout logic. Okay. Better factories leads to better technology, but also better technology in the factories is leading to more goods being produced. So, you have the emergence of technology. And we're going to talk about the other factors involved here in a second. But from the end of the Civil War until the turn of the century, the United States sees an industrial growth that we have never seen before in our history. For the first several years of the United States existence, honestly, our economy was kind of like what I said Jefferson Davis. I'm still in Civil War mode. Thomas Jefferson envisioned for the United States, the quote unquote Yeoman farmer, right? Thomas Jefferson envisioned our society being largely based on agriculture. For many years, it kind of was. Okay, most people were small time farmers, but this is when you start to see that trend. Okay, now the reasons for industrial growth in the United States. Okay, new technology and railroads. Okay, the Transcontinental Railroad is completed in 1869. Plans for it had actually been proposed on the floor of Congress in the 1850s and the early 1860s, but obviously Civil War kind of stole that spotlight away, and the country had other needs that they needed to address. Abundance of raw materials, which we're going to go through what a raw material is in a second. But the United States, part of the reason why the United States, even to this day, has a solid foundation to be an industrial superpower is because, unlike some countries, we do have tons of raw materials right in our backyard, whether it be oil, coal, timber, minerals. I mean, you name it. Some countries, such as Japan, are very, very heavily dependent on imports of raw materials such as oil, which keep that in mind. Japan and oil that will come back around in World War II. But many countries are heavily dependent, and so that's going to up your production costs maybe a little bit. but we have the luxury of having several raw materials right here. Growing labor supply. Okay, we have more workers. And if we were in class, I would ask you guys, why do you think we have more workers coming over? Immigration. Okay, immigration. Many immigrants coming to the United States in the late 1800s, early 1900s. First wave, your Norwegians, your British, your French, the ones from Northern and Western Europe. That second wave, those Southern and Eastern European immigrants, such as Russians, Germans, um, people from places like that, which we will get back to that later. Next, favorable government policies. Okay, so during this time, a lot of laissez-faire capitalism going on, and we're going to go over what that means in a second. So new technology, tractors, the early stage of tractors, John Deere, is in full swing. So obviously to meet the demands of the growing population, phones for better communication of businesses. Okay, before they had telegraphs and all that, oil, whether that be for the trains or for to keep the trains running, or just the biggest thing is for a lubricant for the factories, the machinery in the factories. And then lastly, electricity. We say Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. There is some discussion about that. All right, so like I said, Transcontinental Railroad. Now we have several railroads that crisscross all over the country. Not only is this given more access to markets in the East, but it's also enabling the United States to get several natural resources from the West as we move further and further west and begin to tame it. Okay. So again, solid foundation of railroads after the Civil War stimulates economic growth. Actually, during the Civil War, I'll talk about this real quick. During the Civil War, one of the biggest advantages that the North had was its amount of railroads that it had more than the South. The South had a very, 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 very limited amount of railroads in their possession. And not only that, but the few railroads they did have, if you recall, were torn up as a part of William Sherman's March to Sea. The Union general, when he made his march from Chattanooga through Atlanta onto the coast at Savannah, and then he didn't stop there, went back to the Carolinas, all kinds of Southern infrastructure destroyed. But after the Civil War, the rest of the country is still well equipped as far as a network of railroads. So you move people, goods, and everything else, raw materials, so much faster. So, what is a raw material? I always use this example. And honestly, it's 10 degrees outside, and I've thought about making some that are in my cabinet. So, if you struggle to know what a raw material is, just think if you're making cookies or brownies, what all are you going to need? You're going to need some eggs and some flour, some sugar. Depending on if you're making homemade or from, a mix, you're going to need either your mix or whatever else, chocolate chips, cocoa, I don't know, oil. Okay, you're going to need all these things. Raw materials, okay, in this analogy, okay, is like the eggs and the flour and the sugar. It's the things used to make the finished product, which is the delicious brownies or the delicious cookies. So, that in mind, a raw material, if we're talking about industries, is just natural resources that are used to make a finished product. Okay, so again, items like wood, crops, coal, iron, copper, gold, silver, all these things. The products that we have require the use of raw materials. How many raw materials are needed to make a finished product? It just depends. Like right now, I am my computer is sitting on an old desk. It was actually my dad's, which by the way, I also have a globe at home. I'm a nerd. But this desk, right? It's made of wood. Okay. It looks like the handles might be a little bit of copper or something like that, some other type of metal. Okay, there's a lot of different things that are needed. Okay, so raw materials, just anything you use to make a finished product. And the United States has abundance or a surplus of it. And part of it is because of westward expansion. Okay. Ever since our inception, really, the United States has been focused on what's next. Okay. Not to say we were necessarily greedy, it's just that it was the idea of manifest destiny that drove the United States that has driven the United States for much of our existence. What's next? We have to expand. We're not going to reach our full potential until we expand. And it's just remarkable when you think about our country today. Coast to coast, Hawaii and Alaska. Whenever it started, it was a tiny, tiny little strip of 13 little states east of the Appalachian Mountains. And now, because of westward expansion, look where we're at today. But the United States does expand west, some through legal purchases, such as the Louisiana Purchase, acquired that from the French and Napoleon in 1803. Napoleon, tired of hanging on to a colony in North America, he was too focused on Europe trying to take over that. Oh, that did not turn out too well for him. But the other land that we got, such as Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, that was acquired from the spoils of the Mexican-American War. Okay, that unfortunately we don't get to talk about. But the United States has tons of new land that we acquire in our possession during the 1800s. Lots of resources, especially in the West. Okay, and everybody focused on, California, gold, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's great. Okay, but just other places, Utah has silver mines, and other places have a lot. Oil is huge in the West, like Alaska. Initially, when we bought Alaska from Russia too. Whenever we buy Alaska, and you could also say that falls under imperialism, but whenever we buy Alaska, everybody thinks it's worthless. Then we discover gold. Again, kind of like California, that's fine and dandy. Some people get rich, but what is a money maker off Alaska, even to this day, is the amount of oil that we get from the state of Alaska, and how much oil favors the Alaskan economy is insane. How much Alaska depends on oil to run its economy. It's a ridiculous percent. I forget exactly how high. But obviously, late 1800s, early 1900s, the United States gets more and more resources through imperialism. We'll talk about some of those places that the United States takes over. Let me think. Probably in about a week or two is when we'll be at imperialism. So, during imperialism, we get Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, Guam, all these places around the globe. Those places also have resources. Okay. So like I said, immigrants coming to the United States, we see a massive boom in the 1800s, the late 1800s, but even in the very late 1800s, early 1900s, massive spike, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe. Now, you notice there's my floating hand. You're going to notice right here, all these lines drop about 1910, 1915, 1920. We're going to get to that when we get to World War One and then the years immediately after. This was a time period where xenophobia is running high in the United States, or a fear of immigrants, in large part to World War One, but also to the Russian, in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, fear of communists, all that stuff. Okay, that's why we see this massive decline. But when the United States is industrializing in the late 1800s, we got plenty of people coming, and that's not just people to work. It's also an expanding consumer base, more and more people to sell to. So this is huge. Okay. So again, more workers are coming, more people to buy goods. And you also have to think, the more goods that are being produced, there has to be more capital needed to make those finished products, which everybody thinks, when they think of capital, they think like Capital One, whatever. They think of like just money, like the amount of money or assets that a company has. Capital is also like everything that a company needs to make a finished product, but also like their operation stuff, right? Like, for instance, a factory is making, I don't know, clothes, okay, like shirts, okay? Well, think about how many sewing machines that factory is going to have to have. And so then you're going to have a factory that makes the sewing machines. And there's a lot of these. There's a lot of interconnected industries that feed off one another. We even see this to this day. Your car, think about the car or truck, whatever you drive. Okay, all of the things that went in to make that one vehicle were not produced at that one factory where your car was made. Okay, they may have came from 10, 15, 20 different places, but they all came Ford, Chevy. That's the only two right answers, by the way, of what a vehicle you should drive. Either of those, okay, or maybe Nissan, but they come together. I'm just kidding for those of you who drive other things, but they come together to that one factory. Okay, they come together to that one factory, 20 different places, but it's all going into one car. And this time period is not an exception to that. Okay, we still have that where some factories, many different goods that are needed to make a bigger, larger good or a bigger finished product, that are being made of those smaller goods that are coming in. Okay. Let's see. Favorable government policies. So with industrialization during this time period, the government had a laissez-faire, which I don't speak French, but that's the way I was always taught to pronounce it. Laissez-faire approach with corporations. It's probably pronounced more like laissez-faire, probably more like that, but whatever. Just know how to spell. Okay, which this word, okay, I'm gonna keep saying laissez-faire. It means hands off. Okay, hands off approach. Okay, like if somebody has a laissez-faire approach to whatever, kind of go with the flow, easy going, you know. And that's how the government was during this time. And that's both a good and a bad thing. We're going to focus on the bad next week because obviously government corruption is going to run rampant with, the businessmen being, or excuse me, the government people, the politicians being so indifferent to industrialization, they're going to overlook some gross miscarriages of justice as far as like exploitation of workers and things like that. But we're going to talk about that next week with the progressive movement. So laissez-faire. Let's focus on the business side. That's little interference, okay? So the government, there's not a lot of government oversight, okay? Not a lot of audits by the government, nothing like that. Okay, very few taxes and regulations. The businesses essentially have free reign and the ability to do what they want, okay? And so that is going to favor, that's going to help these businesses get off the ground, maybe at the expense of the workers, though. Okay, but it's definitely going to favor the owners and the people running these businesses, because it's laissez-faire. The government's not getting involved that much. Their business is able to, if they're just starting a business, it's able to kind of thrive early on. And then during this mass period of industrialization, some factories might need their goods and the demand just keeps going and going and going and going. Okay. Now, part of the reason why it was laissez-faire is we're going to play a little game called Republican or Democrat. Okay. So after Andrew Johnson is nearly impeached and removed from office, President Grant becomes president. He was a Republican. Next president, Rutherford B. Hayes, who came into office after the infamous Compromise 87. What was he? Republican, in exchange for the Democrats getting control of the southern state governments at the governor level. Garfield, before he was assassinated, Republican. Chester Arthur, Republican. Grover Cleveland, who is the only president to serve two non-consecutive terms, 1885 to 1889 and 1893 to 1897. He was a Democrat. Okay, but hang on to that for a second. Benjamin Harrison, Republican. William McKinley, we'll talk about him with imperialism too, but he's a Republican. Teddy Roosevelt, Republican. And Bull Moose, we'll talk about what that means here in a couple of weeks, but that he was a Republican, and then he tried to break away and form his own party called the Bull Moose Party. And ultimately, when he did that in the 1912 election, it led to I almost skipped one, but we're going to get to that second. William Howard Taft, Republican, was a Republican president and later a conservative Chief Justice on the United States Supreme Court. Move on. That 1912 election I was mentioning about earlier. Teddy Roosevelt tries to run again against Taft. And it does not turn out too well for him because it leads to the election of Woodrow Wilson, who is a Democrat. And he would be a Democrat president during World War I. Okay, we will talk about Woodrow Wilson a lot in this class. But let's take a step back and think about this. So between 1869 and 1913, aka a period of 44 years, Grover Cleveland was the only Democratic president. Okay, so only 8 years out of 44 during that time was a Democrat in the White House. So because of that, under many Republican presidents, the policies were very pro-business and laissez-faire capitalism. Again, probably favored the businessmen a little bit, right? They could develop their business really well, but in some cases, we are going to see a little bit of government corruption emerge. Some politicians overlook some exploitation of workers, abuse of workers, things like that. But that is a conversation for next week. Okay. So here's what you need to know. Okay. So you guys are actually going to be designing your own business. Don't freak out. Do not freak out. You're not writing like a paper. You're not like having to file like develop like an expense plan and all. No, we're not doing that. Inventory. No. Okay. But you will have to come up with just a bit simple business idea using one of these business models: vertical integration and horizontal integration. Okay, so vertical integration, so we're talking up and down. It's when a company controls the production, the distribution, and the manufacturing of the goods. So the production, the distribution, manufacturing of the good, and you also start from the raw materials. So in many cases, the company might have their access their own raw materials. Okay. Example before we get to our pizza restaurant, like Andrew Carnegie. Okay, Andrew Carnegie, we'll talk about him a lot. He made his fortune in the steel industry. Okay, but one thing that he did, okay, was he owned iron mines. Okay, he had actual iron mines in his name that he would get the iron out of and then use it to make the steel. Okay, not only that, Andrew Carnegie also owned a network of railroads, so he did not have to pay shipping costs. But vertical integration, you control the whole process on your own. So for these two examples, I use a pizza restaurant example. If a pizza company decide or a pizza restaurant decided to use vertical integration, it would look like this. You would have the ingredient supplier. So the company would make the pizza place would make all their own ingredients. So like, you need your cheese, okay? Flour, meats, pepperoni, sausage, whatever. Uh, Other toppings, your mushrooms, your olives, your peppers, pineapple for you weirdos. Okay, all those different things. Okay, the company would have to grow them themselves. So maybe, obviously, like they'd have to have like a livestock barn, a place to milk the cow for the cheese, and then like some type of greenhouse in order to grow the crops necessary for it. You'd have the actual pizza restaurant where they produce the pizza. Okay, and then delivery drivers. So you would not use in this example, the company would not use like DoorDash or Grubhub or any of that. It'd just be like a Domino's driver, which I mean most pizza places do that anyway. So they would use their own employees to deliver the pizza. Now, we're going to get to that later. Vertical integration and extreme. This is the reading, that big thick packet, not that thick, but like 10 questions that I gave you to look over for class on Thursday. This is called Fordlandia, and this is vertical integration at an extreme. Um, and what I mean by that is Henry Ford, we all know him, the car guy, okay, decided that he wanted to totally make all the things for his cars, like all the natural resources. He wanted to own all of those. So like he had like coal mines and forest in like Kentucky and West Virginia, okay, for like the wood and the other parts of the cars that needed those resources. But with rubber, okay, rubber to make the tires, Henry Ford came up with the idea he was tired of buying rubber from people he felt like, especially in South America and Africa, that had a monopoly on it. He wanted to start his own rubber plantation. So he approached the Brazilian government and bought a piece of land that was the size of Connecticut. Okay, the size of Connecticut, so the size of a United States state. And he developed a rubber plantation that would make the rubber necessary to build tires for his cars. Okay, ultimately, it was an epic failure. Okay, it did not work. The Ford company lost millions of dollars on this experiment. I'll let you look at that reading and find out why. Okay, now horizontal integration, so straight across. Okay, horizontal, like the horizon. This is when a company buys out all the same companies who sell the same product. Okay, so the reason you want to do that is you want to eliminate your competition. This is kind of like in Cadiz, what happened recently is Casey's bought out Minute Mart. Okay, I was driving through Mayfield about a month ago. They did the same thing in that town, and the reason why is that you want to eliminate your competition. It's because if you are the only one, or you knock out the competitor next door, all of a sudden you don't have to worry about prices as much, and you can charge whatever you want to. Because competition is ultimately what keeps prices at a certain level. It's like my hometown. There's only one grocery store in town. Okay, so what do you think they do to the prices? Because they're the only one. They jack them up. If you don't like it, drive to Madisonville, 20 minutes away. Okay, and by that point, you've already spent the amount of money you would have saved on groceries. You've spent on gas. But now I live in Murray. Okay, where there's a Kroger, a Walmart, and a Food Giant. Okay, dollar stores. Every 2 blocks, whatever. Okay. So the prices are a little more reasonable because of competition. Horizontal integration is eliminating the competition to make it to where you don't have to worry about your prices. You don't have to worry about competing. None of that. So again, in our pizza place example, we're looking to buy out everybody else that sells the same thing. So all the other pizza places, whether we, do what Casey's did with Minute Mart and keep it open or just shut its doors, we don't want these places selling pizza. Because if we're the only pizza place within 40 minutes, let's say, and somebody's got a real hankering for pizza, it's like, okay, Either pay 14, 15 bucks for our pizza, or you can shove it to Hoptown or Princeton, because this is your only option. Okay. So there's an example. Just remember, vertical is up and down, horizontal straight across. You're buying out everybody who sells the same product. Okay, that's where we are going to leave it today. If you have any questions, please let me know. And again, you need to do the reading over Fordlandia. We will talk about that on Thursday. And I will be checking those questions again. And not only that, but have your business idea done. It's always fun. Don't overthink it. Just make sure it's school appropriate, and make it your own. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. You guys have an awesome day.